All right, Larry Krueger here from the Pig and a Pickle Krug Show with a little 49er video. Check out Pig and a Pickle, 2 locations, Emeryville and Corte Madera. They're open 7 days a week from 11 a.m. till 8 p.m. or until they run out. Pig and a Pickle, the best barbecue in all of Northern California. Go say hi to Damon and Mary, get some brisket chili, and tell them that Larry Krueger sent you. And this video is also brought to you by Underdog Fantasy. Check the link in the description. Use the promo code KRUG, KRUEG, and they'll match you up to your first $100. All right, let's talk a little bit about the 49ers 2024 draft. I really think this draft was a lot about 2025. You look closely at this 2024 draft and you say, you know what? This was the Niners kind of positioning themselves for 2025. It started off by taking Ricky Pearsall in the first round out of Florida, and then following it up on day 3 by adding Jacob Cowing out of the University of Arizona, 2 wide receivers that were drafted, because San Francisco likely cannot afford both Deebo Samuel and Brandon Ayuk long term. And to be completely honest, if Brock Purdy is going to make $60 million, even with the cap going up, I think there's at least a small percentage chance that the Niners might not be able to afford either Deebo Samuel or Brandon Ayuk long term. So they absolutely had to draft some wide receivers this year to give themselves some depth, because the reality is they're not letting Brock Purdy get away. They're paying him what he's going to be due. So they've been looking for a franchise quarterback since Jeff Garcia walked away. They've been looking for a franchise quarterback, really, if you want to even say before that, since Steve Young retired. They've been looking for a franchise quarterback since they drafted Tim Rattay and Gio Carmazzi and passed on Tom Brady and, drafted Alex Smith instead of Aaron Rodgers. The Niners had Joe Montana. He showed up in the late 70s, and, they had him till they traded him to the Chiefs in 93, before the 93 season. And then they had Steve Young. And Steve Young, there was no off time there. It went right from Montana right to Young. And they had Young in 93, 94. They won the Super Bowl with Young, 95, 96, 97, 98. Eventually, Lawrence Phillips missed a block. Aeneas Williams came flying off the corner, concussed Steve Young, and that was it. And then all of a sudden it was Tim Rattay and Gio Carmazzi and Rick Meyer, and time for Jeff Garcia. And the Niners have been looking for a certifiable franchise quarterback for 20 plus years. That, the Tom Brady was in the 99 draft of the 2000 draft. Alex Smith and Aaron Rodgers, that was the 2005 draft. They've been looking for a quarterback for a quarter century, for a franchise quarterback. They have it now in Brock Purdy. They're not letting him get away. So he's going to get paid whatever he's going to get paid. And the quarterback market is exploding. So get ready for $60 million a year for Brock Purdy. So if you're paying your quarterback $60 million a year, you've got as many good, franchise altering, significant star players like the Niners do on their roster. And then you're watching the wide receiver market explode the way it has. You can't afford Deebo and Ayuk. Some people would say you got to pick. I think really when you look closely at the numbers, you might have to get rid of both Deebo and Ayuk long term. So drafting Pearsall in round 1 out of Florida, drafting Jacob Cowing out of Arizona in the 4th round. Those guys were drafted out of necessity, and it was get some good young wide receivers on the roster so that you have a little more leverage with Deebo and Ayuk and contract talks. And so that if you need to pivot and trade one of those guys or move off of them over the next couple of years, that you can do that and keep the rest of your core intact. So drafting Pearsall and Cowing in 2024, very much about positioning themselves at wide receiver for 2025. Renardo Green. You look at Renardo Green, drafted in the 2nd round out of Florida State. He can play corner. He can play slot. He can play free safety. Niners had to find a good young corner. Why? Because Mooney Ward and Diamador Lenore are both free agents next off season. And they probably can't pay both. probably going to have to choose between Mooney or Demo and say which one they'd prefer to pick or prefer to pay, I should say. So no doubt, Renardo Green was drafted largely with the idea that in 2025, the Niners can say goodbye to Mooney Ward, or they can wave goodbye to Demo Lenore, or at least they don't have to worry about who's going to play because they've got a young, good corner in their pipeline ready to step in. And they've got some other guys, Sam Womack, Darrell Luter, come to mind for sure. But no doubt, Renardo Green was largely drafted because Mooney Ward and Demo Lenore are both free agents in 2025. Dominic Pooney and Jarrett Kingston, were drafted as replacement candidates for Aaron Banks and John Feliciano. Now, I like Aaron Banks long-term, and I would sign him long-term. Feliciano's a veteran who's really just going year to year at this point. But both those guys are headed towards free agency at the end of the year. They're both going to be free agents in 2025. And don't think for a second that the Niners didn't draft Dominic Pooney and Jarrett Kingston as potential replacements for their guards, Aaron Banks and John Feliciano, or Aaron Banks and Spencer Burford. But Banks and Feliciano were headed to free agency at the end of the year. Why did you draft Pooney and Kingston this year? Because Feliciano and Banks are headed to free agency next year. Malik Mustafa, another guy. Talanoa Hufanga's got 1 year left on his deal. Niners don't have a lot of depth at safety. They love Jair Brown. They think he's a really good young player, but they don't have a replacement for Talanoa Hufanga yet. Well, it might be Malik Mustafa. So Mustafa, in my opinion, was drafted probably to replace Hufanga, who's got 1 year left on his deal. That's very much a reality. Then you look at Isaac Guerendo. Isaac Guerendo, they drafted him in the 4th round out of Louisville. He's got 4.33 speed. He's a running back who played receiver in high school, who they gave number 49 to, and he looks like a fullback. And he might be able to replace Kyle Juszczyk a year from now and become a very dynamic, fullback, albeit with 4.33 speed. So, Juszczyk had his deal redone this year. There's an awful lot of speculation that at the end of the year, Juszczyk will move on and that the Niners will go in a different direction at fullback. So you look at this draft and you say, well, what was this draft about? It was about 2025. The 2024 draft was about building depth and protecting yourself against free agent defections in 2025. When Lynch and Shanahan took over this team, the roster was a mess, and they took them a few years to build it up. Now they've built it up. Now it's one of the deepest rosters in pro football. Now it's all about, with everybody's salary going up and so many star players on the 53-man roster, how do you keep it together? And I guarantee you, John Lynch and Kyle Shanahan and Parag Marathe have had many, many, many meetings this year and over the last year, just discussing that exact question. How do we keep it together? We got a 24-year-old quarterback who might be able to win a couple Super Bowls in the next 5 years. But how do you keep the roster built up around him once you got to pay him $60 million? Well, you might say goodbye to Debo. You might say goodbye to Ayuk. You might replace him with Pearsall. You might replace him with Cowing. You might have to pick between Mooney Ward and Demo Lenore. You might have to replace them with Renardo Green. You might have to wave goodbye to Aaron Banks. And you might have to plug in Dominic Pooney and Jarrett Kingston at guard. You may have to say goodbye to Talanoa Hufanga when his deal's up and give his job to Malik Mustafa. You may have to say goodbye to your expensive fullback and try to transition that to Isaac Guerendo, who doesn't really have a lot of experience playing fullback. So, the 49ers, if you look at this draft this year and you sit there and go, well, I didn't understand this pick and I didn't understand that pick. I think when you look at their roster and who's slated to be headed to free agency next year, I think that makes this year's draft make perfect sense. Now we know why they drafted Pearsall and Cowing, because they can't afford Debo and Ayuk. And now we know why they drafted Green, because they can't afford both Ward and Lenore. And now we know why they drafted Pooney and Kingston, because Aaron Banks may get a huge offer. Guards are being offered monster deals. He went to Notre Dame. He's had a pretty good career. He's a good guy. There's a chance that he gets a monster offer that they can't match in free agency. Why did they draft Mustafa? It's very possible that, this could be the last year in San Francisco for Talanoa Hufanga. Why did they go after Garendo? Because it's very, very likely that Juszczyk at the end of this year is going to be gone. So the 2024 draft for the Niners was so much more about positioning themselves for free agency in 2025 than anything else. Give me your thoughts on the 2024 draft below. Give me your thoughts on my theory that this year's draft is really so much about covering themselves in next year's against next year's free agent defections. Thanks to Pig and a Pickle for being the title sponsor of the Krug Show. Thanks to Sharp Corner Sports Cards and Collectibles in Pacific Grove for sponsoring this video. Thanks to all of you guys for supporting the Krug Show on YouTube.